Our chief foreign editor, Rob Parsons, has been keeping an eye on this story. He joins me now to talk a bit more about it. Rob, this has been an issue between Italy and France for not just years, but decades. What finally made it happen now?
Yeah. Well, you're right. Absolutely decades. And actually, Jeannie, to describe them as being on the run is probably not completely accurate, because effectively these people have had asylum in France since the 1980s, when President at the time, Mitterrand, granted asylum to Italian leftists as long as they renounced violence and were not guilty of crimes of bloodshed. So effectively, hundreds of Italian former members of groups like the Red Brigades, there were others as well, found refuge in France and have been here for decades, despite increasingly requests and anger on the part of Italy towards the French government, demanding that they should be extradited to Italy to face the crimes that they say they are guilty of. A change has been occurring gradually in France, it has to be said. Back in the 1980s, the attitudes towards leftist groups like the Red Brigades was relatively tolerant, almost sympathetic in some respects. But since then, France has itself become a victim of numerous terrorist attacks. Attitudes to this sort of thing has changed a lot. And that, I think, is what President Macron is reflecting at the moment. When, too, he speaks of the urgent need to build a Europe of justice in which mutual trust holds central place. That's what he's really talking about. Back 3 years ago, or a couple of years ago, back in 2019, the Italian Interior Ministry, at the time was Matteo Salvini, also demanded the extradition of 15 Italians wanted for justice in Italy because of the crimes that allegedly committed during the so-called years of lead. He said that the French were harbouring assassins and had been doing so for decades, people who had murdered innocents and were able to enjoy champagne under the Eiffel Tower, whilst their victim, or the families and loved ones of the victims, continued to mourn the people that they had lost and demand justice. So that, I think, is what is happening here. That's why Macron has taken the decision now.
Rob, what about these people in particular? What were they convicted of doing exactly?
Well, Jeannie, we don't really know anything precise at this stage. But what the French government is saying is that they fall within the remit of the so-called Mitterrand doctrine, whereby asylum was granted only to those who renounced violence and who were not guilty of crimes involving bloodshed. In that case, the suggestion must be that they were found guilty by the Italian state, by the Italian courts, of crimes that did involve bloodshed and have never renounced violence. Who these people are at this stage is not absolutely clear. But the lawyer representing at least 5 of them is describing this as an unspeakable betrayal by the French state. Whether or not that is the case, what happens next is that the public prosecutor here in Paris will have to decide whether or not to release them pending trial in France. And it's not by any means certain that a court in France will rule that they should be extradited, although clearly there will be immense political pressure on the courts that they should do so.
Rob, thanks for that. France 24's chief foreign editor, Rob Parsons.